And now moving to southern Mexico, which is grappling with deadly cartel violence. More than 4,000 residents were forced to flee the town of Tila after drug cartels opened fire and burnt down their homes. The violence erupted last week and lasted for 3 days until the Mexican army arrived. The displaced residents, who are now scared of going back to their town, are living in a makeshift shelter. Meanwhile, Mexico's president has downplayed the attack, calling it infighting between the town's residents. Our next report gets you more details about the rising cartel violence in Mexico.
Drug cartels and gangs have wreaked havoc in southern Mexico in recent weeks. Over the weekend, more than 4,000 residents fled the town of Tila in the state of Chiapas because armed gangs opened fire and burnt their houses and vehicles. The violence erupted last week when dozens of armed men stormed the region. They began shooting at houses and businesses and set buildings on fire. Eyewitnesses say the gunmen returned the next day with high-caliber weapons and military outfits, and the siege lasted for 3 days until the Mexican army arrived on the scene. This eventually forced the residents to flee their homes in Tila to a makeshift shelter in a football court in the nearby town of Yajalon. This is probably the biggest mass displacement in Chiapas since 1997.
We have around 4,000 displaced people, but some come at different times, so sometime around 350 sleep here because in Yajalon, we have big hearts, so many have taken shelter in different places. The shelter distributes food to around 2,000 people, and we have other places where people go for food.
Now, while some 5,000 troops are patrolling the area since the attack, the displaced residents are still scared of going back to their homes.
Terrorífico. No hay palabras para describirlo. Sentir que tu vida depende de un hilo, que le ruegas a Dios porque no te encuentran, que le pides a todo el mundo ayuda y que nadie puede hacer nada por ti. La preocupación de toda la noche, de sentir que tu hija está a tu lado y que está.
According to Mexico's human rights groups, a gang called Autonomos was behind the violence, which is said to be linked to drug trafficking. Tila residents say the gang members had been extorting them for months. And if their demands were not met, they threatened to kill victims, rape women, recruit young people, and burn their homes.
No pagaron el derecho de piso. Y algunos que sí ya habían pagado, también les quemaron la casa. En mi caso, yo no, o sea que me han querido extorsionar por teléfono, pero cuando yo veo los números, que yo no tengo nada que ver, no contesto.
The Mexican state prosecutors say at least 2 people have died and around 17 buildings have been burnt down in the violent attack. However, the government maintains that the violence in Tila resulted from a local land dispute. Mexico's President Manuel Lopez Obrador has depicted the assault as a conflict between the very same people of the town, referring to a long-standing land dispute between farmers. However, Tila is not the only community that has become a ghost town in Chiapas. Battles between rival drug cartels and the army have hit several townships in the Mexican state because the area is a main route for smuggling drugs and migrants. But this has not affected President Obrador, who has long sought to downplay the violence in Chiapas and has accused those who write about it of sensationalism.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.
Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who's invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As the G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost.